everyone, Cleo here, and today we're doing my March wrap-up. So we are in a new location, basically just because my dishwasher is running in my kitchen, which is an open kitchen, so you would hear it if I filmed there. And so if you are a regular subscriber, you will know that basically in this year so far, I've really struggled with consistently putting out videos. So I'm really feeling like filming my March wrap up at this point in time, and so I need to take this opportunity. So the month of March in principle was a really good month for two particular reasons. Firstly, because I finished my TBR early. I finished the books that I had to finish early, and I wasn't really anticipating doing that because I played quite a lot of Elden Ring in the month of March, and then I also was gonna watch quite a lot of movies for the Oscars, but in the end I didn't really do that too much, so that also helped me finish my TBR early. Secondly, as of now, I officially no longer have any over 500 page books left on my TBR, so the road to TBR 0 is just a little bit easier from now on. So here we go, let's just dive into the books that I read in the month of March. So first up in the month of March was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. First up, rewind. So on the screen there will be 3 numbers at all time. There will be the overall number of books left on my TBR. At the beginning of the month that number was 28, I want to say. Then there will be my credit system, which at the beginning of the month of March, should just check my stats. So the credits were at 7, and for every single book off of my physical TBR that I finish, I will add 1. And then the third number on the screen will be the amount of books that I've read, which starts at 0 at the beginning of every single month. So first up, the book that I first started this month off with was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a adult, I believe, fantasy book in which we're following this character called Laszlo Strange, who has had this lifelong obsession with the city of Weep. Now the city of Weep is basically the sort of like stuff of legends. It's basically almost like a myth, and so real scholars, for example, don't actually believe that Weep is a real thing. And aside from that, Laszlo isn't even a real scholar himself. He basically works at this sort of like academy, library sort of institute where he helps out real scholars, but he himself isn't a scholar. However, in his free time he is gathering all of the information he can find about the long lost city of Weep. And in this book he will have an opportunity to find some of the answers to his lifelong questions. Now, I really enjoyed parts of this book. I really enjoyed the beginning. I was really super intrigued about that beginning, and I really liked the writing style at first. But as we got further along into this story, some of the choices that were made, they are fair enough, the choices of the author, but I wanted to see the story develop in a different way, and sadly enough the way that the story did develop didn't interest me enough. And then as we got further and further along in the book, especially towards sort of like the last third of this book, I really struggled with the writing, because the writing became so whimsical, because a lot of this, as the title kind of implies, Strange the Dreamer, a lot of it has to do with dreams, with going into a person's dream, experiencing somebody's dream. And while it doesn't really have the sort of like absurd elements of people's dreams, of the way that we actually dream, it still had that very heavy whimsy to it, which I don't necessarily like in my writing all that much. So I thought it had very promising elements, and I really definitely enjoyed quite a lot of it, but in the end it was just like a disappointment for me, and I don't think I'm going to continue on with this series, because since putting it down I've had zero interest in continuing this story, and I actually heard from quite a few people that they didn't enjoy the second book as much as it did the first. Of course, with me being disappointed in the first, there's always the possibility that I would have the opposite experience with book number 2, but I'm just not interested enough to find out. Continuing with teal blue books, we get Captain Corelli's Mandolin by Louis de Danière. So this is a book set on a Greek island, which is Cephalonia, and it is taking place during the Italian occupation of the island in World War II, I'm guessing? Yeah. In this one, we are following a family who has been living on the island all of their life, and we're kindly following the story from their perspective. However, we also have Italian characters come into play into the story. For example, this Captain Corelli is an Italian officer who is basically, his job is to contain the Italian population, I'm guessing. There is a very interesting relationship between the Italians and the native Greek population, as the Italians don't necessarily put a whole lot of effort into containing the population neither. They're not necessarily being brutal about this occupation, and they're very much kind of wanting to have a loving relationship with the Greeks, it seems, at certain points in time. However, dynamics also kind of depend on the German presence within the islands, because the sort of like dynamics between the Germans and the Italians will also kind of determine the impact on the Greek population itself. I really quite enjoyed this book. However, there were definitely a lot of times within this book that I found myself not necessarily engaging all that much with the story, and I think particularly they tended to happen when the story went into the war itself, when the story would focus on, you know, what was happening in the war, how loyalties were developing, how strategies were forming. And it's not necessarily the case that I don't care about any type of war story. I did quite enjoy the war sections in War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, for example, but war isn't necessarily something that really intrigues me all that much, so you kind of have to, like, it's kind of exceptional for me to care about those things. But I did care about the human story of this family and the relationships that developed there between this family and this Captain Corelli. But ultimately, I don't care enough to recommend this one, for example. I mean, I've forgotten almost everything about this book already at this point in time. I know some of the main plot points, but this book hasn't really left an impact on me, and so I don't think I'm gonna try more Louis de Bernières unless, you know, one of his premises really strikes me. I think it's definitely a decent one. If the story sounds at all appealing to you, then definitely give it a go. If you want a World War II story that kind of features a different type of setting, a different type of story than your typical World War II setting, then this is definitely also one that you can try. But for me, it just didn't have really much of an impact. Next up, we get to one that I ended up putting down, and that is The Mysterious Island by Jules Verne. So this is translated from French. This is a classic. It is basically an adventure story. So we have 4 or 5 guys setting off. They're basically imprisoned in some sort of camp in the south. The story takes place during the American Civil War, and so these 5 people are imprisoned in the, what do you call it, the Confederacy at that point in time, and they escape on a hot air balloon. Different times, guys. And so they take this hot air balloon out, but it's during a storm, and so they crash on this mysterious island. Now, I read through about 140 pages of this story and I was just bored. That was my main concern with this one. Basically, in the 140 pages, not a whole lot happens. They kind of struggle to make fire, they kind of want to determine where are they, so they calculate like the latitude and longitude and stuff like that. And then they have one member of their crew that has gone missing, and so they go and search for this member, for example. But not a whole lot happens in this first section, and I just found myself bored a little bit, especially bored with the science in it. Jules Verne is a very science-heavy writer, and I really enjoyed that a whole lot about his journey to the center of the earth. But in this one, I think I'm more or less in the same position. It might just have been the particular science that this book talks about, but I just didn't find myself all that interested, nor could I really follow along completely to his explanation about how you calculate latitude and longitude, but I also didn't really have that much of an interest in doing that because it doesn't really matter that much to me. Aside from the fact that this was boring, there are definitely also problematic elements to this story. Problematic elements that I was willing to kind of overlook because of the fact that this is a classic. It was written centuries ago, so there were different frames of reference at the time, but that in combination with the fact that it was boring definitely made me put this one down. So for example, it includes the N-word. There is a black character, so amongst the 5 characters that we are following, one of them is a black character, and so he's first introduced using the N-word. Throughout the story, as so far as I've read it, he's very much a loyal / subservient type of character, very much loyal to this white guy who has saved him, and I'm expecting that to kind of stay the same. Aside from his character, there's also references to savages and the portrayal of savages as these wild, dangerous men. So I also didn't particularly enjoy that stereotypical view neither, but you know, these are things that I was willing to overlook, but the story was just not catching my attention at all, and so I just didn't feel the need to push through. We then move on to a highly anticipated read for me, and that is Pachinko by Min-Jing Lee. This is the Dutch edition. I don't think we have a similar cover in English, in case you are interested. I'm sorry. The Dutch edition. So this is a book centering Korean characters. However, the majority of the book is also set in Japan. So Japan at some point colonized Korea, and in this sort of context, the Korean characters within this story will be moving to Japan, and then it's a whole lot about the tensions between these two cultures and the way that Japanese treat and perceive Koreans. And so we're looking at Koreans who have immigrated into Japan and the struggles that they face over there. Now our main sort of like entry point into this story is a girl called Sunja. So when she's still relatively young, when she's still like a young adult, a teenager, she gets attracted to this older guy and she has this sort of like love affair with him, and as a result she ends up pregnant. He makes advances to her, or like tells her like, you don't need to worry, I will keep you comfortable, I will take care of you, I won't just leave you lying in a ditch somewhere, I won't just abandon you in this state. However, she does not accept his offer, because what he's basically wanting to do is kind of place her as his mistress somewhere out of the sight of his wife and family that he never even told her he had. So instead she rejects his advances and she marries somebody else, and they move to Japan together to start a life over there. I really enjoyed the story a whole lot. It didn't get to that sort of like 5-star level, or like it was probably 5 stars, but it didn't get to that level where I'm like absolutely in love with the story now. Maybe just because I'd been expecting to really love it after all, but it really is a great story. The writing is amazing. I really love this look at a time period and a culture that isn't often heavily featured. I really learned quite a lot about the period as well, and we definitely follow a disparate cast of characters. We follow characters from different walks of life who've had different experiences. We follow, for example, first her father, who always lives in Korea. Then we follow her, who has made the move from Korea to Japan. Then we follow the generation after her, who has only lived in Japan, for example. And we really get very disparate conversations, disparate storylines. We have different reactions to the hardship of their situation. We have different ways of dealing with the discriminations that they face from the Japanese population, and I really enjoyed it a whole lot. I would definitely highly recommend it to you guys. I really want to start the TV show as well, to see how this has been put into, how this has been translated onto the screen, because I think it could be a wonderful adaptation as well. Next, I continued my reread of A Chorus of Dragons with The Memory of Souls by Jen Lyons. This is the third book in A Chorus of Dragons. This is also my favorite book in the series so far. So in A Chorus of Dragons, this is an epic high fantasy series in which we are following mainly our protagonist Kieran, though there are multiple protagonists to the series, but in the first book we mainly follow Kieran. Kieran grew up on the streets, he's also kind of a thief, and as he is burgling this house at the beginning of the story, he stumbles upon a scene that he should not have witnessed, and the story kind of ensues from there. It's an action-packed story that's also featuring a very complex, convoluted world that we are very gradually kind of making sense of as a reader, because our hands really aren't being held. We're very much just being thrown these elements, and as you get more acquainted with the story, with the world, you start to put these pieces together. However, it's really not spelled out, so that can be a difficulty when first starting this series. However, it also is a really fun ride. I really like the humor in this one. It's very much more of a light read to some extent. The humor in it very much gives the whole a little bit of a light tone. It has prophecies, it has shape-shifting, it has mimics, it has reincarnation, it has soul swapping, it has dragons in it. It has a whole ton of elements in it, and aside from that, the cast is diverse. There's a whole lot of different representation for different sexualities. There's a polyamorous relationship at heart, and the Memory of Souls is my favorite probably because in this one is the first time that we have the majority of our cast all together. Plus there's also just a whole lot of family drama within this one, and I just ate that up. So I really enjoyed the Memory of Souls a whole lot, and I was so happy to reread it. There was some stuff that I didn't remember was part of this book and not of the next one, for example. So I really enjoyed my reread of this one a whole lot. And then the final book that I finished within this month is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, so the final book in the Greenbone Saga. In the Greenbone Saga we are following members of the No Peak clan on the fictional island of Keikon. This is basically sort of like urban Asian-inspired fantasy. It is not fully modern day, but it's definitely like maybe like the 80s, the 90s or something like that, or even more recent than that. So there definitely are quite a lot of modern elements to this world, which to some extent I don't really like. I think I like my world to be a little bit older. I don't necessarily, for example, like the presence of guns within fantasy, and we definitely have those within this as well, though most of the action, most of the fights element to this world, the martial element to this world, is more centered around a martial arts culture. And so on the island of Keikon there's basically this jade that can be harvested, and jade can give magical powers or can enhance people's abilities basically. This jade culture really is manifested in form of clans, and on this island there are basically mainly two big players, the Mountain Clan and the No Peak Clan, and so this trilogy kind of looks at the conflict between the two, you know. I liked it in parts and I didn't like other parts. I would have preferred to have perspectives from both sides of the clans, and even though it became apparent to me early on that that was not going to happen, I still to this point feel like I would have still preferred that to have been the way that we went, because it would have just added so much depth, so much nuance, and it would also mean that we would, you know, identify with members from both sides of the clans, whereas now, because we're reading from the No Peak clan perspective, the Mountain Clan becomes a sort of like apparent enemy, and that perspective does change throughout the series. There definitely were moments in which I was kind of rooting for a reconciliation between the two clans, for example, or in which we were humanizing the other clan a lot more, in which relationships between the two clans became a lot more enmeshed, a lot closer. And so I did definitely like that a whole lot, but I still would have preferred if we from the beginning just had perspectives from both sides of the clans and had that nuanced portrayal from the beginning. Another thing that I kind of felt is that with this one, the author at times would skip over parts, and those would be the parts that I would have most liked to see. There were these moments in which the aftermath of certain events was kind of rushed over, whereas I would have really wanted to put more time and emphasis in how the characters dealt with the aftermaths of those events. And on the whole, I know this series as being, you know, most people who read this series seem to have this huge emotional impact from the series, seem to be heavily emotionally involved and heavily, you know, anxious about the fate of their characters. And I didn't often feel it. I felt it, don't get me wrong, I did on occasion feel it, but I didn't feel it as much as I thought I was gonna feel, and towards the ending of this one, I didn't necessarily feel all that much. So I did really enjoy it. I think there was an interesting world to be explored. I liked the idea of the jade and the way that we played with jade withdrawal, with the idea of, you know, individuals who have a better innate ability to handle jade versus others, the crimes that are committed because of the jade traits, the implications to society because of the heavy reliance on jade, or the heavy sort of like heroification of jade warriors and things like that. So I thought that there were a huge amount of interesting elements to this one, and in this third one I actually really liked the fact that within the No-Peak clan itself, or within the family at the center of the No-Peak clan itself, there was a lot more conflict, because also in the first 2 books I found that to be kind of lacking. I wanted there to be more conflict within the family itself, because it felt a little bit too lovey-dovey. It wasn't the case that there wasn't any sort of miscontent between these members. It wasn't the case. There were things in the history of these people that we were following that definitely made for some, you know, that definitely created some tension between our characters. But on the whole, these were also people heavily loyal to this family, heavily loyal to the name of Call, and heavily, you know, fighting for that name, for their family, defending their family through its core. And I like that we were kind of seeing different perspectives in the final book, that we were kind of seeing how how the next generation's perspective on clan, on family, kind of would differ a little bit, and how certain things that had taken place would impact certain characters and would make for them to have a more complex relationship to the family, or to kind of want to break with the family even. And so I would have liked those types of elements to be in there a little bit more. I wanted this book to be a little bit more ruthless, but on the whole I really did enjoy it. I still definitely think that it is 4-star material. It doesn't necessarily hold a special place in my heart, but I really respected it, and I really am eager to read more of Von der Lee's work. So with that over and done with, we have my TBR down to 23 at this point in time. As I said at the beginning of this video, I no longer have any books over 500 pages long, so the 23 books remaining on there are all under 500 pages long. I will be buying another book in the month of April, which will be an over 500 page book, but it's just the one. And I am still expecting to finish Project Cedar TBR before July, but there's a complication, and it's becoming more difficult. But in any case, let's just stay on the positive at this point in time. It took me 3 months to read all of the over 500 page books on my TBR, and now we're finally getting down to the under 500 page ones. The vast majority of them are in the 400 or 300 page range, but still I'm expecting to go through books a little bit quicker at this point in time. So I took 3 months to read 12 books, so statistically speaking you would think it's impossible for me to get to 0 TBR, but because of the fact that I was reading all of the big books, hopefully I still have a shot at this. But so yeah, let me know what your favorite book was in the month of March, and if you've read any of these books, and we can talk about them in the comment section down below. But so, I will round off this video here. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys for the next one. Bye!